Just ask. Right?
What?
Mine's so fooling around.
Testing one.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I would ask that you please take your seat and sign in and turn your cell phone to silent or vibrate. Thank you for your patience as we awaited quorum. We now have it. And let's get right into it. Calling the meeting to order. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest late this afternoon? Seeing none, we'll move right to the items for consideration, which is a report, which will be preceded by a presentation. I would at this time look for a mover and seconder on the report. We'll receive the presentation, then be able to ask questions on both. Moved by Councillor Nunziata, thank you. Seconded by Bob Gale, thank you. Ms. Chamberlain, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the kickoff of the 2019 budget. Tonight's presentation, as the Chair pointed out, is to provide the highlights of the report CSD 35-2018, which is the 2019 budget guidance. Specifically, the presentation will focus on some operating budget priorities and the impacts of those priorities, the capital requirements, and as well as the next steps in the budget process. The 2019 budget will establish resources required to support and enhance existing services, as well as continue to advance council priorities that are established by this council in the interim of having a new council and new strategic priorities. As well, the objective will be of meeting the expectations of the residents of Niagara and continuing to ensure the safety and well-being of the public. This budget discussion this evening is the first process of involving council in the process. However, staff have been working diligently already behind the scenes. And our process, as usual every year, involves reviewing the annual impacts of changing costs as well as the changes in our revenue structure. And recently, we undertook a Q1 review of 2018, and that budget to variance analysis will assist us quite significantly in informing the 2019 budget, most specifically with up-to-date costs and volumes as they have impacted 2018. It also included a review and the continued review of impacts of employment and other contractual obligations, as well as inflationary pressures. And quite often, as we move through the puts and takes, we find that the funding equation often requires us to requires consideration of balancing service delivery with available funding, but ultimately, it's council who determines the priorities for the year through the approval of the budget. So annual regional expenditures for program services and infrastructure total approximately $1.1 billion. And for context, approximately half of that expenditure is funded from federal and provincial governments, as well as from fees and charges for services, as well as other revenues. For example, investment income contributes and defrays the cost of services. And in the case of capital budget, we use reserves and debenture financing to fund a portion of that. The balance of $493 million, using 2018 dollars for the time being, comes primarily from taxation as well as assessment growth. What we've depicted here also on the donut for council's reference is to demonstrate, using the hashed areas, how much of each of the operating budgets of that 493 is distributed across each of the lines, each of the three operating budgets, and how much of those budgets are dedicated to support capital infrastructure. And that amounts to approximately 20% of the overall 493 million of our operating budgets funded through taxation and rate revenue are dedicated to supporting capital. So that budget, as I noted, is funded in part through assessment growth, and assessment growth is the additional tax revenue that comes from new development. It's not from reassessment, it's from the new development in the region. And as council recently received some presentations from planning on permit activity, it was very clear that Niagara is in fact growing. The $1.1 billion in building permits that were issued, reported to be issued for 2017, are 23% higher than 2016, and the strongest permit activity in the last 15 years. So given that we know that this permit activity ultimately leads to assessment growth, we've analyzed that it's about a 2-year, it trends at about 2 years to go from permit activity through to construction through to assessment growth. So we anticipate that with this permit activity in 2017, we could see 2019 being our largest year of assessment growth in the last 15 years. So this slide takes a look at what that permit activity would depict if we took permit activity and multiplied it by tax rates for the years. As is depicted by the dashed line, we can see that that very closely resembles, based on permit activity, it resembles the actual assessment growth that we've realized over the last number of years, in particular the last couple of years, where we see a very close correlation of the actual assessment growth with that derived by the permit activity. So therefore, it's very reasonable for us to presume that that permit activity in 2017 could realize a 1.9% taxation revenue growth for 2019. However, because it's really early in the year, and certainly MPAC's process of doing the inspections, et cetera, are very early in the game. We've received one supplementary tax billing of the 7 that would generate the tax growth for next year. We are proposing that for guidance purposes that we continue to use 1.5%, which is similar to 2018's assessment growth, which is still a substantial increase over the prior 1% that we'd seen in the number of years prior to that. So that assessment growth, while 1.9% in assessment growth equates to about $6.5 million worth of new taxation revenue, we know that this alone will not allow us to balance the budget equation. So therefore, we look to taxation increases for purposes of funding other budget pressures. Our first scan of the needs of 2019 have identified that in addition to the more recurring pressures that we see each year related to compensation and benefits and utilities, et cetera, we are incorporating some funding requirements for a number of significant key initiatives: specialized transit, grants for multi-use bike paths, waterfront investment program. And based on these preliminary estimates for base services and these initiatives, our increases are estimated for water and wastewater at approximately 1.9%, up to a 4.9% for waste management. However, we know that the waste management requisition is going to see anticipated impacts of the reduction in market commodity prices as a result that would impact the sale of our recyclables. Additionally, we also look at Council strategic priorities, and we look to continue supporting these initiatives. The most significant of these initiatives is the requirements for capital infrastructure, but we've also identified transit as intermunicipal transit as a priority, and we're assessing the requirements of the Niagara airports, and we've quantified those impacts as well. Looking backwards at how we fared with respect to the cost of services and investing in Council strategic priorities, we can see that we've actually been able to maintain our tax rate increases at or below the rate of inflation. The actual 5-year average increase since 2014 is an average of 1.56%. For 2019, we are anticipating and using a target of core CPI inflation of 2%, which is consistent with our prior years. The historical rate budget increases for water and waste management have seen similar outcomes, with the average 5-year for water and wastewater at 0.65%, and the 5-year average for waste management actually a 0.2% decrease as a result of some opportunities that we've realized with our commodity tax prices, our commodity market prices. Turning our attention to the capital requirements for the next few slides, Council recently approved the Water Wastewater Master Servicing Plan as well as the Transportation Master Servicing Plan, and these studies have established a long-term vision in alignment with the growth plans for infrastructure that accounts for 80% of regionally owned assets. These studies have informed the development charge background study, which is also a foundational piece for the capital budget. And these growth-related studies, in addition to the asset management plan, form the foundational building blocks for the information that goes into building the capital budget and forecast. So to focus on the asset management plan for a moment, those strategies that I just referred to, their focus is primarily on growth, but the asset management plan that was approved earlier in the Q1 of 2017 focuses primarily on the sustainment of existing infrastructure. And we can see that the asset management plan did identify varying challenges for different lines of business. So for example, if we look at the levy-supported budget, based on historical funding levels and average of our forecasted needs, it identified essentially there was no gap. However, when we factor in the impacts required to sustain our growth activities, as well as some new assets required for council priorities, as well as the timing variances of capital, staff have identified a preliminary funding challenge of about $203 million, which staff are continuing a very diligent exercise of working through. But conversely, on the water wastewater side, the asset management plan did identify that to support existing infrastructure, there's an annual funding gap of approximately $77 million a year. However, we've already managed to work through a number of different mitigation strategies whereby we may be able to at least provide some mitigation strategies for 2019. This next slide is simply, FCM has recently published a very appropriately contextual to this presentation video on asset management planning. It's a 4-minute video, and I think it would add a lot of value to this presentation. So if council would indulge me, I would like to run the video. Alternatively, council can view the video at their own leisure, but if it's the will of council, I would proceed with the running of the video.
I think that's fine, Ms. Chamberlain.
Whoops, sorry. Oh, let's see how steady my hand is. There we go.
Hi, I'm Lisa, the mayor of my town. The role of my council is to ensure that residents are provided with services that are essential to our quality of life, like clean drinking water and sanitation, transportation, parks and recreation services. Our community's infrastructure assets are critical to deliver these services. Today, like in many Canadian communities, 1/3 of my town's assets are in poor condition, in part because most of our assets were built in the 50s and 60s and are reaching the end of their useful life. At the same time, our community has grown, and so has the demand for new and improved services. We've also had to spend money to upgrade our assets to comply with new environmental and safety standards. We made investment decisions based on our ability to finance the upfront development costs. However, the bigger ongoing costs to operate, maintain, and eventually replace these assets were not fully built into the analysis. Plus, our assets are vulnerable. Climate change has resulted in impacts from more severe storms, flooding, and other unexpected events. Our assets were not designed with these impacts in mind. For example, one of our roads was washed out during last spring's flood, and we had to reprioritize and redirect money in response. Now we're caught in a cycle where new infrastructure is needed to service growth that has been sprawling beyond the core. Residents count on us to deliver exceptional services. We need to catch up on overdue maintenance of existing assets and to finance the replacements of our old ones. We strive to keep taxes and fees low. However, the revenue we collect to manage all this isn't keeping pace with it all. So my council has been faced with some tough decisions. Do we adjust tax rates? Do we delay maintenance and repairs even longer and risk the consequences? How much should we place annually in a reserve fund? Do we reduce the level of services? Do we delay new projects? So what are we doing? We're engaging in asset management planning to be more strategic about how we manage our assets and spending. We're reviewing our assets across all departments in a holistic and integrated way. We're evaluating the full life cycle costs of different capital assets and land use decisions to ensure we're choosing the best long-term option for the community. To become more resilient to a changing climate, we're developing a climate adaptation plan and starting to identify how we can become less dependent on fossil fuels. We now recognize the value of the services our natural assets provide, like managing stormwater and improving water quality. We're also speaking to residents about the cost of service delivery and their needs and priorities. All this work is helping us to coordinate our infrastructure work and set priorities. Now we have an ongoing process in place that is proactive and allows us now to make better informed and strategic decisions. We're now much better placed to support my town's economy and our residents' quality of life sustainably. The health of our assets is central to achieving these goals. Do some of my town's challenges seem familiar to you?
So thank you for indulging us with the video. We felt that it was very important to identify the challenges that we've just described of bringing together the challenges of existing infrastructure as well as growth are certainly not unique to Niagara. They are impacting all municipalities across Canada, and certainly the options that they've identified with respect to how we tackle this challenge are certainly the items that we're going to consider as well, which we've identified some on this slide. So to wrap up, basically we've identified to council that we certainly will budget the target, we will target the budget increase at the inflation rate of 2%. However, we know that there are challenges, in particular as they relate to sustaining infrastructure. So over the next few months, staff will consider all the opportunities available to us, which include and are not isolated to pursuing all new revenue sources. We know that there's some new cannabis revenue that's being announced, and certainly the details with respect to that are outstanding. Staff are working with the City of St. Catharines and partnering them on a sponsorship revenue strategy. So that's something that may present an opportunity on the revenue side. And on the expenditure side, we'll look at all opportunities for decreasing costs. We now have the pleasure of having a new commissioner, so we're going to kick off the sustainability review project, and certainly there may be an opportunity in strategies like the grant and incentive review to repurpose dollars that could help mitigate some of our pressures. With respect to capital, we will certainly have to look at prioritizing the capital requirements, but we will not do so without assessing the full impacts and risks associated with delaying any of those infrastructure investments. Additionally, we have a new provincial government. There may be new policies affecting many of our provincially funded programs, so we will have to take those into consideration as we finalize the budget. And certainly it's at Council's discretion, as was noted in the FCM video, the potential to enhance guidance to target some of those public priorities, which may include infrastructure. And we will come back to council with the budget process respecting the schedule that was approved on December 7th. And that schedule obviously is quite different than what we've seen the last number of years as a result of the election. However, two things that I would like to point out with respect to the schedule is that number one, we are looking to offer a budget orientation session primarily for the benefit of new council members that may be on board. And that would be in lieu of the budget workshops that we've had over the last number of years. But because staff plans to continue with our internal development process on our same schedule, we hope to have actual live 2019 material to be able to do some of that budget orientation in early December. And then the next thing that I would point out is the last couple of years, we've looked at a variety of different tools and mechanisms to provide more information on capital. And for the 2017 budget, we used workshops. However, for the 2018 budget, we did use an information report to the standing committees. And as the standing committee calendar for 2019 has yet to be established, it's quite possible that the week we've established for the capital budget would be the same week as committee. So there may be very little value in having a report go to committee in tandem with the capital budget. So I just wanted to point out those items. Other than that, the budget presentation is condensed quite tightly into the January-February framework so that we can continue to move along with the tax policy decisions that the municipalities rely on every year. And that concludes the presentation, and myself and any of the other staff are happy to take your questions.
Great work as always, Director Chamberlain. I'd invite you to come to the top of the horseshoe here. We'll open the speakers list for some questions, and just as you're coming forward, I want to take the opportunity to welcome Todd Harrison. He's the new Commissioner of Enterprise Resource Management. In case those who are at this committee haven't seen or met Todd yet, I encourage you to welcome him. He comes to us from the City of Niagara Falls, and we're happy to have him. And he'll be a critical part of this budget process moving forward. As Director Chamberlain noted, our job today really is to set guidance, let the staff do their work, and the next term of council will pick up the ball from there and move forward. So this is intended to be a high-level overview and guidance setting without getting into too much detail. But with that, I will look to Councillor Maves.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tempted to start talking about $19 here or $21 there, since you don't want me to talk about detail, but I won't. Slide 17. I just want to make the comment that the election's October 22nd, correct? I don't know who's, and so the new council will be sworn in by when, if the CAO knows the numbers, or?
In November, Councillor.
In November. So just having been in this position before, that doesn't give new councillors very much time to get up to speed on the budget, and it almost becomes a fait accompli and gives them very little opportunity to have meaningful input into it. I would suggest you look at having a budget orientation meeting for the new council in November rather than December, which then turns into a Christmas break and so on. So I'm just going to make the point, I think you should look at trying to get that first budget orientation for the new council into November. That's a question I'm kind of asking.
Yeah, I think it's fair comment. I'm not sure if you look to the CAO, perhaps earlier the better in terms of budget orientation. I'm sure there'll be several orientation options, but go ahead.
I can get the exact dates, but I believe your inaugural meeting is in December, and that's why we planned for December 13th.
Why is that? Why would we waste a month and a half?
So that's a good question. I got to get the dates. I apologize. I don't have the dates in front of me, but we do have all the dates of the appropriate bylaws when a new council comes into play.
Why is it? Why is that? Why is that? Is that a municipal affairs? Oh, okay. All right. Well, it'll be a tough thing for the new council to be able to digest, especially new people being elected for the first time in a budget in a short time frame. So you might want to look at that. My question on page 16 was pursuing new revenue sources, and you talk about cannabis revenue. What revenue would that be? And my understanding is the police services believe there's going to be a higher cost than the revenue it's going to bring in. Do we have any early comment on that?
Director Chamberlain?
Through the chair, the revenue sharing, at this point, all we really know is that it'll be a minimum of $10,000 per municipality, and that the region would get equivalent to the municipalities. So there's some revenue there. Through the budget process, we'll certainly be doing that analysis of whether there's incremental costs associated. At this point, I know that with public health and with some of the work that I've been assisting in, we haven't identified any substantial incremental costs with respect to regional services. However, we have yet to establish whether or not the police have identified that's something that we would get from the police through their budget guidance or through their budget process.
Okay, I see Council Gale is on the agenda to speak, and I'd be curious to hear his thoughts on that when he comes up.
Also, Councillor, just on that point, the CEO would like to add something as well.
My apologies on the previous point. I got the information. Okay. So if I may, Section 6 of the Municipal Elections Act indicates, and I'll just read it verbatim, the term of all offices to which this act applies is 4 years, beginning on November 15th in the year of a regular election. However, despite subsection 1, with respect to the 2018 election, the term of all offices shall begin on December 1st. So December 18th of this election will be December 1st. All subsequent elections will be November 15th.
Okay, thank you. Next question was with regard to water and wastewater. My recollection was at the end of 2017, we had a surplus, fairly substantial surplus. So despite having a surplus, we're gonna request a 2% rate increase. I wonder if anyone can give an explanation to that.
Through the chair, for water and wastewater, we actually had a deficit and we had to do an in-year budget adjustment to fund that from reserve. And so after even funding that deficit, we had a $90,000 surplus on a $111 million operation. So we actually did run a deficit, which we funded partway through the year.
Where do we have the surplus then on that side?
We have a surplus with waste management as a result of the fiber market prices and the sale of those recyclables. And that surplus over the last number of years has been substantial in the way of $4 to $5 million a year.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Grenier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm okay with this as a starting point to give staff their ability to create the budget. But if looking at the presentation, and I'm going to get on this again. On slide 16, we talk about 5 different challenges, and then the slide before, we sort of highlight where we're going with capital and where some issues may be. My hope is, if I can put this on the table, is that we have a more meaningful, in-depth conversation about our decision-making on each of these and address business cases for moving forward in either reducing funding or increasing funding or getting into new programming. We've never really had the time or made the time to do that over the past couple of years. And our budget making has been much more administrative rather than legislative in our debates. And I think that that's a shortcoming. Not that anybody's done anything wrong. I think that we should take this opportunity with a new council coming in to actually address the business cases of making specific decisions and to help use that to drive home to the broader public the value proposition of regional government. And the budget process should be used for that. And I think that it's an opportunity for us now moving in and highlighting these challenges now in June of 2018 for the 2019 budget that'll be passed in February of 2019, that we can actually engage in that and have those decision-making processes put in front of us in a way rather than trying to whittle down fractional points on the levy to meet a target. Let's talk about services and delivery and the purpose of what we do here. And I'm hoping that that narrative can be used a little more in depth than we have the past few years, now that we've got a little bit ahead of the game here. And if Mr. Harrison or Director Chamberlain want to.
Through the chair, certainly we will continue to provide business cases for any increases in or enhancements to existing service levels and for any new priorities. That process will continue. However, what I think will help in response to the councillor's question is that we will be undertaking the sustainability review, which will look at all of our service areas across the corporation, and we'll look at opportunities and strategies to create alternative service delivery models for some of those lines of business, potentially where there's low value service areas, certainly consider opportunities for eliminating services. And that process will start in 2018 and will continue through for a number of years before we leverage the full benefit of conducting this review, but it will be done entirely with the input of council. So certainly you'll see all of those service areas and all of those business cases for any of those opportunities for improving or having an impact on our budget.
And towards that end, if I can, Mr. Chairman, the last comment is kind of agree with Councillor Maves. I think it's, we have a very tight timeline to accomplish, and I'm hoping we don't fall into the same sort of trap of trying to, because we have to get it done by a certain date, of passing up of those debates and conversations about the value rather than trying to meet a rate and assemble a budget. So I'm hoping that we understand that the frequency or cycle of meetings would be a little bit more than we've had in the past, trying to get something done that we typically take 3 or 4 months. We're essentially wedging it into to 2 months. So I hope that we understand the homework assignment we're giving ourselves today too. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question of your procedure at this point. We have both the presentation on the floor and the motion on the floor. And given that it is committee, would we be able to speak twice?
Well, let me put it this way, Councillor. The report, the motion, and the presentation are all up for discussing right now if you want to. The minutes of this committee will go to council, and you'll have an opportunity to speak to it when the minutes come to full council, if that's your question.
Okay, so then just so that I have to deal with everything in one shot, won't be able to come back to anything today at this discussion. That's my concern, and number of questions.
Yeah, there's nothing precluding me from going back to you a second time at committee.
All right, okay, thank you. So first question is, and point I want to make is, I think along the lines of Councillor Grenier's point about using the business cases and the opportunity or the situation new council will be in January. I don't see that the slide 17 is in the motion, so passing this tonight doesn't cast that schedule in stone. But in case it does, I'm concerned that there's nothing in this for the review of the standing committees for the operations or those operational business cases. I see you've added to the slide about capital budget and capital submissions in January to January committees for information. But you say nothing in this about similar presentation to standing committee on operations, on the operations budget. So what is the intention there?
If I may, Councillor, so to be clear, that schedule was approved and it's stated on the slide. That was approved by Council December 7th, 2017.
Yes.
My recommendation would be the new term of council, if they want to adjust the process or extend it or change it in any way, that we let that term of council do that. We have one budget committee meeting this year, and this is it.
So I was wondering if that was a misprint or not. So in December of 2017, we approved this agenda for discussing the budget for 2019. All right, well then I'm concerned again that this schedule does not allow presentation of the operating budget to the standing committees. How do we remedy that, and when would we be able to remedy that?
Again, my notion is the new term of council will be able to remedy it however they see fit. They
Or
would-
we could put an amendment to this motion here tonight.
Well, the challenge is that it's already been approved. It may require 2/3, when in the new term of council, it would not require 2/3.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So on my next question is about the, I guess the main line about target increase for existing services at 2%. I've asked this question before, and I think your slide presentation spoke to 2% according to council priorities. So I want to be clear that this isn't every program gets 2% regardless, and we go from there. What is the intent is that the gross operation is 2%, and that there will be adjustments within the different programs, up, down, so that we end up at 2% in terms of the levy as opposed to the programs.
Look to the CAO.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Tim. So that is a process that we do at the corporate leadership team. We receive the budget guidance from council. Let's say it is at 2%. When we meet as a corporate leadership team, someone may be above the 2%. And so then we would look at other departments. So yeah, there is prioritization of programs and services amongst the CLT group. So and then holistically, then we try and get to the 2%. But that does not mean everybody gets 2%. Some may get 4, some may get 1, but then we target the 2%.
Okay, so that, Mr. Chairman, is increases my concern about standing committees, having the chance to look at these, because it appears that CMT will present in January. They don't even present it until January 24th, operating budget. CMT will present CMT priorities as to what programs go up or down. And council as a whole will then have the job of identifying our priorities in all operations without having seen it at the standing committees first. So I'm concerned that is that needs to be addressed, I guess, by the new council, but it needs to go to standing committees. And so where does council put in the priority as to what gets 4% and what loses 2% and whatever?
Through the chair, as the CAO pointed out, because the budget is dealt with at a very corporate level, recognizing all corporate levels, when we disaggregate it to the standing committees, then we potentially get, again, a fragmented budget process whereby one service area is not being considered in light of the impacts that it might have on others, which is the lens that CLT looks at it. So the best opportunity to ensure that the budget is looked at holistically in the same way that CLT does is at a budget review committee of the whole, which is the process that we've adopted for the last number of years in order to ensure that the budget doesn't get disaggregated again and then approved in those silos.
Yeah. Well, without being argumentative, I think for the last number of years, a number of us have wanted operations reviewed at the standing committee level. I think as Councillor Grenier was getting to, this process is sort of an administrative priority setting as opposed to a legislative priority setting or councillors. So I'm concerned about that. And because of that, I'm reluctant to support this general line 2% without really having the opportunity to consider the options. So what I would propose is that we target 1.5% and staff present 1.5 plus the options that would recommend getting to 2%, so that when it comes back to us at committee level or committee of the whole level, council has some idea of what the options and what the range is. I'm reluctant to say, here's your 2%. I won't support 2%, and what I'd offer is an amendment to this motion that the target increase for existing services be 1.5%, and staff be directed to present options that take us up to 2%. So that when it comes to council, there's some options presented. I think what was suggested is that we would get a business case simply for increases, and fair enough, and that I like the business case approach. But I would offer an amendment, if I can get a seconder, that the target is 1.5 with options for 2%.
Thank you, Councillor. You're well within your right to do that, and I will look for a seconder. However, I will remind the committee a similar approach was taken prior in this term, and it wasn't well received. There was a laundry list of options, and the committee didn't like that. So with that said, your amendment is in order, and I look for a seconder.
Thank you.
Councillor Quirk, seconding that. Okay, so separate speakers list for the amendment. And perhaps while I go to Councillor Quirk, we can try to get that wording on the screen. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support Councillor Tim's amendment with respect to the 1.5% for a couple reasons. One is, going back to slide 7 on our presentation, we're looking at a 1.9% in assessment growth, but there's a little box there that says we should maybe recommend calculating it as 1.5% to be conservative with it, which allows us sort of a little bit of movement. So I would say I would be prepared to support Councillor Tim's amendment as long as there's a recognition that I was going to ask if we shouldn't be reducing the potential growth in this motion to 1.5% to stay in line, but I would happy to keep that at 1.9% to support Councillor Tim's motion to bring it out to 1.5. The other thing that's not captured in this motion, which was direction, was also the potential proceeds from the MPCA funding after the legal wrangling with the City of Hamilton was completed. So that also has a little bit of opportunity to come back to us in this term of council with respect to discussion. So I think either one or the other, we either stick with 2% but bring the assessment growth back to the conservative estimate of 1.5, or we go with 1.5 like Councillor Tim's is, recognizing that we should be getting 1.9% in new growth because that 1.5% is directly to the levy and is the impact on the taxpayer. So I'm supportive of the amendment. I think it's the right approach. I think it doesn't do staff any harm to occasionally sharpen our pencil. We know that with public health this past go around, they started with a zero base budget and came back with some great savings and opportunities for us. Maybe it's time to look at that for some of the other departments as well as we go through this process. As I think Councillor Valpatti had suggested at the time that every year each of our major departments should go through a zero-based budgeting. Maybe this is the time to take that into account as well.
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're getting the wording of the amendment. Okay, thanks. Councillor Gale to the amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I recognize, I'm putting my police hat on now because I know that whoever's the next chair of the police board next year will be in front of you again with 1.5 and there's not a hope. I guess from an election year, it'd be easy for me to argue is let's go 0%. Let's get back money. But let's be realistic on what we're doing here. I just had conversation with the chief via text on this and I said, I see 2% here. We haven't got a hope in hell on this. And that our increases in wages will be 1.95, I think, this year. We have taken from reserves. We've cut back officers. We've got Niagara Lake asking for officers. We've got St. Catharines asking for new officers. Do the math. We have 4 shifts, an officer is $130,000. So you can see how we're up against the 8 ball on this. Crime supports new officers. We don't have an increase in crime. Our police are doing a fine job, but we have to replenish some of our reserves. And with opioids and all the other items coming up, we're going to be in front of you saying that I would suggest to you that we'll be just shy of 4%. I hope I'm wrong. But right off the bat, I'm going to tell you it's just shy of 3% without doing a thing because we've hit some reserves as well as the 2% on wages. So come on in at 1.5, come on in at 1, come on in at 0.5, do what you want. But whoever's the next chair for the police is going to be standing there like I did this year with the chief trying to justify it. Now, you want to bring back the retirement settlement, that was $870, and the chief's on side with replenishing that within 3 years. It was a good business decision on that. The only problem we got with that, and I'll tell you right now, is Toronto had a freeze on hiring, And then they threw that out. They threw that out so quickly, it wasn't funny. They held their ground for a few days, it feels like. And then they put everybody into the police colleges. So we can't get our new officers trained that fast. And that's what the chief said to me. We're saving money as soon as we get these new officers on the road. So I think we had 8, if I'm not mistaken, in this police college class, and we've got more.
Councillor Gale, if I may, I don't want to, I want to caution on getting into the minutia of police budgets, because that's not for discussion.
Okay, I'm just saying that, come on, let's be realistic on this. Or maybe it's one of these things that police are different and everything else falls under that, and that I can support. As long as you understand whoever's the next chair of the police board is going to be here. With that strategy, I support Councillor Timms, and that as long as you isolate the police and make us try, hold us to the fire, but you're going to be looking at 4% next year unless every major investigation is $1 million. So hopefully we don't have a bunch of major investigations. So that's all. I've said enough. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hodgson to the amendment.
Yes, this is particularly relevant, I think, to the amendment. I was a little surprised that in the presentation there's no emphasis or mention, really, I didn't see it anyway, with respect to the fact that the 10-year program of uploading by the province is over, and so for 2018, that's the last year. And I think it's really important for us to remember that levy-supported spending has been allowed to increase each year over the last 10 years by 1.5%, some years almost 4.5%, that we didn't have to report as an increase in levy. It's just we substituted former spending with new spending. And that's made this balancing of the budget, has made the 2% kind of the consumer price index workable, but I think it's going to be a considerable challenge next year. So I just think we need to be realistic on this one. And it's fine to come out and say 1.5%, but you're really just going on a fishing trip. I actually believe Councillor Gale is correct, is that there are sometimes you really do need to confront the budgeting challenges with real numbers. You can't just make up stuff and say let's try to get under there. So anyway, I'm not going to support the amendment because of that. I really do think that we need to recognize that there's about a 1.5% to 4% that we're not going to have anymore. And we could in fact be going the other way. I would fear, because that may be one way the province wants to recover some funds by downloading again, which is a real possibility we don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Lopati.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will support this amendment. It's my thought, my information, that this does not mean that every department has to come in under the amount. It's across the corporation. Is that not true? Through you, Chair.
Correct.
To you. Yeah, through you, Chair, to you.
Yes.
So I will support it. I'm sure that there will be savings in some departments, and some may be a little over, and the police may be one of them, but I think the goal is where we should go. I'm really pleased that Councillor Quirk mentioned zero-based budgeting, and I know I shouldn't do it under this amendment. However, when is the time to do that if I wish to introduce that at some point this evening?
I think after the amendment to the main motion, you're welcome to discuss that and bring anything forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Timms, it's your amendment. I can go to you last. I see Chair Caslin is up. That's fine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just a little concerned about the process. When we talk about guidance, we're really talking about a guideline to try and aspire to. And here we are essentially operationalizing, the tiny points between 0 and 2. Perhaps there's an appetite that we start at 0 and work to a number that is consistent with what staff is recommending, and then we can work backwards instead of trying to divide 2 into pieces. My preference would be that we revise it to 0. If we're going to start cutting it 2% down to 1.5, why not cut it to zero and use that as their starting point?
I'll take that as a rhetorical. We do have an amendment on the floor right now.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, correct. I guess my point is we're interfering with a process and trying to operationalize a process. The amendment to me doesn't make sense. I think if we're going to come back with staff's recommendations, why not come back with staff's recommendations instead of telling them what they should recommend?
CAO.
Through Chair to committee, reference back to the comments of the Chair of the Police Services Board, I want to express to you what we experience here. Now, I want to qualify this by saying we have an excellent working relationship with the Police Services management, the police chief and his senior management team. There's an excellent relationship and we have good dialogue. But the reality is, when they come high, we departments have to cut in order to hit that target that you provide us. That's challenging. That there's some collective agreement provisions and statutory requirements that police services have to have that pushes the budget up, and then there's an expectation that we decrease our departmental and divisional budgets in order to make that budget guidelines. And I'm going to say that's going to be a challenge at 1.5%, respectfully. But I do recognize that we do have some room with the assessment growth, and we do have some room with NPCA funding should we win the legal challenges. But I would say you do have a policy, and the policy is that you target the inflation rate. And that's exactly what you have before you. It's a 2% inflationary rate that we are following, and that's why we came up with that number.
Thank you, CAO. Chair Gazin, you're fine with that for now on the amendment?
Yeah, could you just describe the policy again? Remind us what the policy is?
Director Chamberlain.
Through the chair, the budget guidance policy that was established in 2012 is that it uses inflation as a reference point and a guideline for the initial preparation of the budget, and it requests that all departments and ABCs strive to meet that guidance tied to inflation, and that where the guidance is not achievable, that staff will bring back options to mitigate and or provide rationale as to why additional funding is required. So it sets a framework, but then respects the fact that council will bring back that in, or staff will bring back that information where that inflationary guideline is not achievable.
Thank you.
Councillor Timms, it's up to you if you want to speak now, or I can go to you last again.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak now and then hear what the rest. But there's a couple of discussions about the process and the policy. This meeting is to set budget guidance, and it is by far the most important meeting to the taxpayer of the entire year, because this practice is to set the target, the council target. We understand the policy, and it certainly gives staff the framework to work from, but the role of council at the high level, we're not trying to get into the minutia, is to set the target and set staff to work from now until December on meeting our target. I fully understand the police budget, the police chair's point of view, and that's why I asked at the very beginning. This target of 2% is not meant to apply evenly to all departments and all ABCs. It's meant to be in the end, the 2% increase in taxes in effect. And so it is by far the most important meeting we have all year, because if we set this target at this date, it's very unlikely or very unusual to vary much from it by the time we get into the next budget, or by the time we finalize the budget. We go up and down a little bit on little items, as has been said. That's when we get into some of the minor adjustments. But the primary target of this meeting is to say, here's the target, and let's work towards that and see what we end up with. So that's why the motion is intended to say, as the chairman said, let's aspire. So let's aspire to 1.5, see what can be, what has to be done, or what would take us to 2%. And then council has some of the sort of mechanics and the details to decide where we're going to set our real priorities. So I think this, well, I'm interested in what everybody else has to say, but this is by far the most important meeting in terms of the taxpayer and setting the guidelines. We say target the guidelines and we set staff to work for the next 4 months how to do that. And if we say 2%, they're not going to work to show us what would it be at 1.5. They're going to work to show us what it is at 2. So that's why I like to see this motion carry so that we have those options when it comes to considering this in the new term. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rigby.
As I understand the guidance that was brought forward back in January, that we would stick to the inflationary index, basically. And so what's being recommended by staff was that it be 2%, and that it would the index in accordance with the taxpayer affordability guidance. Any adjustments from there, as I understand it, would have to be looked at individually and staff report back as to how they could mitigate that requirement. Initially, I was certainly in favor of Councillor Tim's motion. However, I think that Councillor Gale gave me the wake-up call. The reality is, I think we're going to be looking at even more of an increase than what Councillor Gale has indicated. The police have just gone through an increase, signed new agreements. We saw that effect last year. You're going to see it again this year. I think we need to have them trying to bring their affordability back. And so I won't vote for this motion, even though I was going to second it at one time. But I think staff's approach to this is very good, and we should go forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. To the amendment and to the idea of following the taxpayer affordability guidance policy, the CAO has stated that staff are recommending this and trying to do that. Well, that's only on this line, because later on in the motion, when we're saying exclusive electricity and infrastructure, they're not. So I think unless there's a reconsideration here of the policy, council is allowed to do this. What I would recommend, however, is, and this would be a friendly amendment, that the 1.5 should be, and where it says in accordance with the taxpayer affordability guidance policy, it's not, right? So that we say, remove that and put it later on in the sentence. So that target for existing services be 1.5%, and the staff present options to council to bring the increase to 2% in accordance with the taxpayer affordability guidance policy. So Councillor Timms was, and I'm going to say this down below because I hope there's an amendment down below as well, but Councillor Timms was suggesting when it came to our human resources policy that we have a stretch goal. And I'm not sure I agreed with him at the time, but now looking back, staff were able to meet that stretch goal. And I think we should do the same thing here now. We should have this stretch goal before us, and we know what those numbers are. The police is an issue, and I'm pleased that the chair of the police board spoke about it. Those increases that the police came in, we know don't include the deficit numbers for the last couple of years, which totals, I think, $11 million. And that's not even in that guidance. And the police budget is actually higher, if you look at when we approve the budget, is actually higher than all other regional items combined for the first time ever, Mr. Chair. So it will be an issue, and we have to look at it with our eyes wide open But by the same token, I think we should have that stretch goal. So if that can be arranged, because I think it makes sense in terms of the taxpayer affordability guidance policy, if that can go at the end as opposed to where it is, I'd be willing to support the motion and see what staff comes back with. The other thing, the final thing, comment, Mr. Chair, is that for a new council, and Councillor Maeve spoke about a new council, this will actually give a new council the opportunity to look at the budget in hard numbers and understand it. Councillor Maves is quite right. At the start of this term, it was sort of a, here, approve it and go, and there wasn't a lot of debate on that. So I look forward to next term, this council looking at the budget, sinking its teeth into it, understanding it more, and that'll help in future years of the budget. So if that can be made, I'd be supportive of it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. We're in the process of making that adjustment right now. That's fine. Thank you. Councillor D'Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want some clarity here. We have a policy in place, and now we're amending the policy. Does that not require reconsideration?
So to be clear, there's no amendment of the policy.
Okay. Sorry,
go ahead.
sorry, Mr. Chair. No, go ahead.
So we're not amending the policy. It looks like, I don't want to speak for the mover, but his request is for staff to bring back options that would show the policy. So from one, it still says 2%, but wants to see the options between 1.5 and 2%. If I got that right.
So it's still coming in at 2%. You're just looking for the difference between 1.5 and 2, where staff is going to allocate that extra 0.5%?
The mover of the amendment?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The policy, I understand, was set back in 2012. Every year we set our target. The staff knows what the policy is. Now we at this meeting decide, are we going to just repeat policy or are we going to set a different target? So what this intended motion is, that in effect what you're saying is you come back, staff comes back with 1.5 and 2. What is the differences? Council gets a chance to look at those. So the effect, the motion is, we can get it back up there, is that we target 1.5, and then what are the options to get up to 2%, which is the policy. But understand, what policy is, and council can always, policy is like a bylaw as opposed to a provincial offenses act. You have policy, but you have this meeting to establish whether you're going to follow policy or you're going to do something a little different. This motion and this meeting is about telling the taxpayer we want to target 1.5 and we want to know what it would cost us and what has to happen in order to meet policy at 2. So as the chairman, as Mr. Councillor Barrick suggested, it's really to present the 2 options. And as Councillor Augustine suggested, it'll present the new council with 2 options, with some real numbers and 2 options. And we have set the target at 1.5. If we don't do this, the target will be 2, and we'll have no idea what 1.5 looked like, what we had to sacrifice in other departments in order to fund the police. And we were told earlier that this is to set 2% growth according to priorities. Police will probably be a priority, but we need to see the options, and that's what this intends. It gives us at least those 2 options, 1.5 or 2. And I still think it follows, it doesn't contravene policy, and in fact, uses policy as intended. That's policy. Do we need to make an exception? Do we need to look at something different than policy? I don't want to get stuck in the box of policy all the time. Here's an option, target 1.5, policy is 2, what's the consequences? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, as long as we all know that the target is 2% then, and we're just looking how we want to reduce it to 1.5, because that's the policy. So you could spin it any way you want. There's a rule, and to me, if you want to target 1.5, then that's definitely a change of policy as opposed to 2%. So you're picking 1.5. Do you want to see 1%, as the chair mentioned, or even 0%? To see what can be cut, to be removed. But, okay, I got my clarity that I guess it's that people interpret things differently. I interpret it, we're going for 2%, and we're looking at how we can reduce it to 1.5 and what we're going to cut to bring it down to 1.5. So basically, I'm asking staff, that's how it's going to be presented then?
CEO.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor D'Angela, that would be the process. That's what, to answer your question, yes, if this motion carries forward. We'd look at 1.5% and what are the programming that brings you to 2%. So yes, to answer your question, yes, that's what we would do. But if I can provide commentary holistically, not to be argumentative with Councillor Timms, but to bring it to 1.5%, I do recognize, and I thank Councillor Hodgson for making that fact, that we no longer have an uploading. We have to adjust for that. So the big spend is not there because we have to account for the uploading. So thank you, Councillor Hodgson. But if you look at this current priorities of this council, which hopefully gets carried over of the priorities to the next council, if I just state three things: your intermunicipal transit, your incentives and grants that we've tried previously to come and say, these programs are not that affordable. You say, no, these are very important to us. Our development charges incentives, our growing call volume with EMS, we're going to have a significant challenge just to get to 2%. And in fact, I will never say that the sky is falling or we're going to have to cut programs, but we're going to have to seriously take a look in order to achieve these principles of this council, like intermunicipal transit and your incentive programs to encourage development. So a 2% actually means a reduction somewhere in the organization of programs and services. We would have to deliberate CLT to find out where those cuts are going to be. I'm not going to say the sky's falling because that's not reality. We find a way, but that's what you're asking us to do.
Yeah, thank you for that clarity. So what I'm going to be seeing when the next budget, well, I guess I'm assuming I'm here, but the next council is going to see the 2%, and they're going to see what can be removed to bring it down to 1.5%. Right? Okay, perfect. That gives me my clarity. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I don't understand why we're going through this exercise at this time. If we don't trust our staff to do their best to bring us in under the 2% guidance, then we should do what Chair Caslin and what Councillor Volpatti have suggested and start at zero-based budgeting and have them bring in real numbers. This is imagination if we think that, well, we're going to start at 1.5% and then we'll let staff come back and tell us what they can do to bring us up to 2%. That's silly. We're wasting time and we're insulting our staff. Either go at 0% budgeting or leave it at the 2%, because the numbers are going to be all skewed with the new political system or the political party in government as well. We don't know what they're going to do about downloading, how they're going to meet their budgets. We know we're going to have problems with the 10% gas tax too, so everything's going to be changed.
Thank you, Councillor Redekop.
Well, thank you, Chair. This has all been very enlightening. I mean, we don't need to be here if we're just going to follow the policy. We can simply have staff tell us it's 2%. So we don't even need to be here, and we've just wasted whatever amount of time we have been talking about this. I would expect if this passes that staff will tell us, here's what you get for a 1.5% increase. If you want to go to 2%, this is what you get. So it's the reverse of what Councillor D'Angela is talking about. That's what this says. 1.5%, here's what you get at 2%. Whether it's 1.5%, 2%, 3%, 0%, staff has to provide us with a budget. And we're just telling them, here's the latitude. We're saying 1.5%, maybe 2%. And when we get to the budget, for those of us who are here, yeah, we'll be dealing with whatever the government decides to do between now and then. but the staff has to have a starting point, and that's what this does. So I'm going to support this.
Great, thank you, Councilor Redicott, for that commentary. There's no other speakers. I'll call the question in favor of the amendment. All in favor?
The, what's presented up there, is not quite right. 1.5, and then take the core consumer price index and put it behind the 2%?
Yeah, that's it.
Because 2%, that's,
Thank you for that.
it's not 1.5, it's, thank
I
you.
believe that was the original intent, so thanks. We'll get
Okay.
that clarified. In the meantime, Commissioner?
I just want to thank everyone for the discussion, Mr. Chair. The process that I'm used to is somewhat different than what is being bantered around here. However, I would point out, though, there are a couple of things, and I think to touch on what Councillor Redicott had just said is if you look at Chart 9, our staff have put together the projected numbers with our starting point. And if you look at that, you can see on the three budgets what the starting point is. Built into that are some assumptions, and some of those assumptions don't take into account some of the things that Councillor Gale had indicated, but those are our starting points. So already, if we go to a new target of less than at 2%, you can see there's some challenges that we have to go back as a corporation to go back to all the operating departments and the boards and agencies. If we go down to 1.5%, that's going to make the budget process a little bit more challenging. So again, I would caution council to look at this and to give us the direction that we can go back as a staff and work with the rest of our staff across the corporation and come back with a budget that's going to be able to be considered for in 2019. I would want to show something though on chart 11. Even though the budget guidance has been 2%, you can see in both waste management and in water and wastewater that the 5-year average is well below 2%. So again, what we're facing today is just a priority setting. If you choose 1.5%, it'll be a little bit more difficult with our staff because we'll have to go back and find savings throughout. Or if we stay at the 2%, which is the guideline, again, I would argue that it's not necessarily a policy, it's a guideline, and it was established in 2012. So these are the types of things that I want you to consider when you're making it. I find it a very interesting conversation, and I appreciate, I just want one last thing, Councillor Valpatti. I think that the zero-based budgeting will be addressed in the sustainability review that the staff has been charged with doing, and I found out about it on my first day, and I'm looking forward to getting that done. And that will give us the opportunity for the next term of council of looking at all the business units and finding out where there are efficiencies, where there are opportunities that we need to fund more. So I appreciate the speak, Mr. Chair. And
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And understanding there's still assessment dollars, there's still our rate budget, et cetera. So with that, focused on the amendment that's before us.
Can I just ask a question? I'm sorry, I apologize for talking. The other time is, we talk about the core consumer price index set as of when? Because as of today, it's 1.7. So I'm just wondering at what point we actually decide when the core price index is determined. Is that as of January 1st, 2019? We'll use that as an estimate, or as of the time it's presented to us in the final numbers? Because I know we're talking about, as Councilor Grenier says, skirting around the edges of what actually does have an impact. But I think to that effect, if we are talking about policy and we don't know when that actually is registered, and we're talking about trying to, the impetus to this is trying to say, let's sharpen our pencils and find out what we can and can't do within an overall budget. I think that's where the discussion gets a little bit off the rails if it's just automatically assumed to be 2% when we know as of today, Stats Canada says it's 1.7.
So thank you, Councillor. As you're asking your question, I got the answer. It's a 2019 budget, and that's the inflationary target that is forecast for 2019. Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your hands. A recorded vote has been requested. I'll look to the clerk to call the vote when ready. Okay, that carried. Thank you. We'll go back to the main motion. I believe we had our speakers list there as well.
Fortunately not.
Unfortunately not, being told. It was 15-8. Yeah, just finding out where we were on the speakers list. Okay, thank you. Councillor Gale on the main motion now.
Thank you, Chair. A quick question before my comment there. Will our comments be recorded from what this amendment went? Because I don't want to go through what I just said a year from now if I happen to be on the police board or happen to be in this room. I'd like to just play it back. Will they be recorded?
Well, we are live stream, and
That's the only way. It's
that
not
recording is accessible.
Okay.
That detail will not be recorded in the minutes, but it would. The live stream is
It'll
available.
just be on video. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just keep it and show it and that, because I'm not knocking it. I just don't want to do it again and that. So my question is on page 9, please, on your slide presentation. As you know, I am still, and I know Councillor Volpatti is an opponent of the airports, us buying the airports, correct me if I'm wrong, and we wanted to show the economic viability of it and what it was bringing to us. My question through to you, Director Chamberlain, is you're allowing in the budget for purchasing of the airports. If we don't purchase the airports, that money obviously stays with us. How can I be assured, and maybe this is, I know the answer to this question, but how can I be assured that that money's not going to be spent other places? So if you allow a couple $1 million, I don't know what the dollar amount is, and that, how can I know it's not going to go somewhere else just because we have it?
Through the chair, if you're looking at slide 9, you'll see there with those.
I don't have slide 9.
Okay, is there any way, Matthew, for us to put it on?
Don't need it if it's that hard.
But basically, the amount for the airport, the $2.2 million, is not included in the estimate in the donut on the left-hand side for existing services. So for the tax levy, we've estimated pressures in the neighborhood of 2.6%. That is excluding the 1.1% on the right-hand side, which includes the airports. So with the guidance that council has given us of 1.5% and 2, there's a probability that you'll see that $2.2 million for the airports in that list of what you could buy for the additional 0.5% or what you would need another 1% to buy. It certainly is not likely to be in that bucket of the 1.5%.
Okay, and in fairness, I'm keeping my thoughts open on it. As Chair Castleton said, he'll prove to me down the way the viability of it and stuff like this, but I just wanted to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rigby.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what I wanted to bring up actually has been dealt with, but it was about the standing committees. So that doesn't prevent the standing committees throughout this year to put forward a motion and request for having a discussion related to its operating budget. I'm asking the question, does it?
Yeah, possibly not in year, but if it's 2019 budget, that might be an issue.
Well, we would be talking about what the staff are working on, particularly public works in my case. And it's been something that's always, last few years, has been a bit of a struggle trying to get some detail as to where and what we're doing at Public Works. Seems to me the committee ought to have some input into guidance towards the staff on that issue. So I'm asking the question, is the motions that we have here, does that prevent that committee from requesting to have that kind of discussion at one of its standing meetings?
Well, as you may know, Councillor, we do receive quarterly reports, and perhaps part of that is including the forecast for the year end. Maybe that's the venue to start the discussion there. I would be cautious about talking about 2019 budget process. We've heard today, the council has approved the timetable, but certainly you encourage you to have those conversations with staff in your committee.
I think it's more in the detail than it is about what the 2% is, frankly, and I think, and in many cases, it is about capital and where your favorite road is being fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And if we could have that kind of discussion, it might be worthwhile.
Yes, and I believe the capital
And
was
so we'll
run
look forward to
through
the
committees.
quarterly reports.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you. My comment was captured in the amendment, but I just wanted to maybe perhaps a suggestion for staff to consider when I was elected at the beginning of this term, after election, but before being sworn in, the staff was kind enough to put together a series of tours and information tours and orientation meetings. Perhaps maybe we could make a suggestion that for new councillors and for returning councillors, that part of those orientation sessions could be an update on where we're at with the budget process and maybe what past budgets have looked like and where we spend our money, because of all the things that I've learned in the short time I've been here, that was the steepest learning curve, I think, in terms of trying to address where and how we spend money. So that was just my suggestion, to take into account the fact that we are going to be moving quite quickly once we get the new council sworn in.
Look to the general manager to comment.
Mr. Chair, through the members of council, yes, those information sessions that the councillor was speaking about, those are scheduled right now in draft for the last week of November. And for clarification, the inaugural is December 6th, for council's information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodgson on the main motion.
Thank you. My comments were captured in the discussion about the amendment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edgar.
Thanks, Chair, but that was a mistake on my part. I pushed the wrong button when I wanted to speak to the amendment. Sorry.
Understood. Councillor Redicott. Thank you for your candor. Councillor Volpatti.
That happens a lot around here. No. So, yes, I would like to introduce an amendment, but I don't know what the sustainability review is, please. So could someone please explain that to me?
Director Chamberlain.
In 3 words or less? No.
Sorry, through the chair, I will not be able to do it in 3 words or less. However, you may recall that Commissioner Burgess identified that we have a fundamental sustainability issue with respect to our budgets. Every year we have more that we want to spend than we can spend, and some of that is due to perhaps we veered off path of core services and we're doing other things. So what we undertook was a request for $400,000, and it was approved in the 2017 budget, whereby staff could work closely with some consultants who have expertise in this area, and we would undertake a review of all the individual services that the region provides. And this kind of speaks to what Commissioner Harrison was saying with respect to aligning it to zero-based budget. It will go down to the service level. It will look at individual service areas, the budget attached to that service area, the staff resources attached to that service area, and it will look at a common criteria for evaluating those and prioritizing and ranking them. And then how we choose to proceed with that prioritization process will certainly be at the discretion of council. One opportunity is to sort of look at the bottom 10%. Are there opportunities to either eliminate, look at alternative service delivery, but it looks at the programs at that level of granularity at the service level. And we're going to start that process. We have a meeting tomorrow, I believe, to bring our new commissioner up to speed and to start the ball rolling. Certainly, we don't expect to leverage any big gains from this in 2019 because the process will be quite onerous to go to that level of granularity, but we hope to, through the next term of council, really get some significant wins through that process.
Thank you very much for that, Helen. I think my amendment or my motion, what's going to be added to this, is still in order. That would be my reading of what Helen has indicated. It was done by Public Health last year. It resulted in really significant savings. Yes, really significant savings in Public Health. And, you know, congratulations to them for initiating that of their own accord. Our people, one of the problems with zero-based budgeting, as it was explained to me a long time ago, was that we just didn't have the capacity to engage in that kind of a process. But our PeopleSoft software is fully implemented. I've been told it's functioning very well, and that it gives us added opportunities to engage in a really deep dive on one department, because there's no way that I'm suggesting that this be done across the region. I mean, that would be imbecilic, I think, because it's just too onerous a process. However, I think it's an onerous process for sure for whichever department is chosen, but I don't think our residents deserve any less. I mean, seriously, let's get to it. I appreciate the sustainability review and all of that, but my motion basically is that staff select one major department to engage in the zero-based budgeting process for 2019.
Thank you. I'll look for a seconder to the amendment. Councillor Easton seconding the amendment. Thank you, Councillor Volpatti. I'll open a speakers list on the amendment. In the meantime, we'll try to get it on the screen. Any speakers to the amendment?
They're going to put it up now. Did you get it, Matt?
This is a new.
Director Chamberlain, just as we're getting it on the screen here.
Through the chair, as identified, the intention was with the sustainability review to do that across the board, corporate-wide. However, we would, certainly the only way to ensure the cooperation and the engagement of everybody across the organization is to put everybody through the same lens and same process, like the public health process. But we do recognize that in order to make sure that we're embarking on the right process, we had initially envisioned that we would start it off and pilot with one line of business and see what that looked like and make sure that the structure of what we were doing could be applied across all of the lines of business. So that's the intention. I would caution, though, with respect to the time frame that we have to undertake that and to come back to council and to get the correct engagement from council to move us forward. We have a lot of breaks in the schedule because of the election, and piloting and having the right direction on what that sustainability plan looks like for one line of business could be difficult. We didn't anticipate having that outcomes ready for 2019. We had envisioned the outcomes would be ready for 2020.
Okay.
Through Chair to Committee and Councillor Volpatti. So it would take us in an unbalanced approach if we focused on one department, is what I would submit. I went through this process of a sustainability review of the City of Hamilton, and the way I could describe the process is that you look at all departments and within the department's divisions across the board, and you identify what your statutory programs are, or your funding programs that are provincially funded are, and then you start going and reviewing them all, prioritize them, and then that then guides you to selecting which division could be subject to an alternative service delivery review, or is it required, and you bring it to council. So it's a process that takes a very systemic approach to the whole organization, and then it prioritizes it, because we may miss an opportunity. If we only pick one department, we may miss opportunities in other departments. So if we take a very holistic review, identify where we can target, it may be a percentage of one department and a percentage of the other. And that's what I would submit is our intended process that we want to do with the sustainability review. And it takes it across the organization rather than an unbalanced approach of one department.
So thank you. Councillor Volpatti.
Yes.
Is that amendment that's on the screen?
That's what I said.
Okay, thank you.
But that's not what I mean.
Okay.
I think I like what I said still, but I think I'd just like to leave out the words for 2019.
And the other thing maybe, if I may, is I'm not sure this amendment would inhibit staff from doing it in other departments. If what I'm hearing is select one and staff want to do it in others, by all means. So I'm not sure if they're conflicting.
All right, so select departments, how about that? That staff select departments to engage and put the S in brackets, right? So it's departments, to engage in a zero-based budgeting process, period. I just want to make sure that we get there. I mean, it's been 8 years for me that I've been talking about this, and I'm tired of hearing myself talk about it. So if that's open-ended enough, that would satisfy me.
Thank you. Chair Caslin, I see you on the speakers list.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure that staff had the resources to be able to do that, but I think we've had the discussion already. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gill.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm going to support Councillor Balpatti on this because I like innovation. And I think this is innovative what she's coming up with, whether it works or not. We have to think out of the box. Maybe it can't be done, but something like that. Certainly, if you turned to the police and said, "Can you commit at 0%?" I'd be laughing, but or crying. But regardless, I just think that it's great that she comes up with something like this, and I'll support any innovative ideas that we can think of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Easton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I didn't really hear Councillor Patty speak specifically about zero-based budgeting. What I heard her say was that she wanted one department selected, and I think the discussion that we've had is quite valuable. However, I guess maybe I was thinking down another line, although I was happy to support the motion to get a good discussion going. Because I wonder whether alternate service delivery model of evaluation is gleaning us what we want. Some of them take a great deal of time. Sometimes they can become quite political. And I would think if staff are going to do this, that there's got to be some expediency to it all so we can get the benefit out of it. I won't be able to support this because I really fundamentally don't believe in zero-based budgeting. I believe in the sustainability model, and however, I do think that we need to look at the impact of all the examining, all the methods that we use to examine getting to an efficient budget process. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rigby. On the amendment?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chair. Just a question of staff on that. The hardware and software that we presently have, and I know that it was certainly a long-awaited process. I just hope that it is capable of providing you the backup in order to do this. Having gone through a zero-based budget process in my own business at one point, it was a disaster. So I hope you don't have that disaster. There's a lot of talk about zero-based budgeting, but it's not an easy task. I'm all for trying it, and I'm pleased that we're looking at a small piece of the operation to get that experience, and whether it is worthwhile or not. So I certainly would support it, but I just hope that the software and hardware is in fact going to provide you the backup that you're going to need. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, I would certainly echo Councillor Rigby's comments that having a system in place that allows us foundational to be able to pull some of this information is valuable, but there's a lot of staff time that really goes into building up and documenting all the different programs and being able to discuss those and do the business cases for each one of those programs. So while the PeopleSoft and EFMS is one piece of it, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And if ultimately, it doesn't lead to much action, it's not a lot of good value.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Recorded. Thank you. Look to the clerk to call the vote when ready. Okay, that's carried. Councillor Burrows, we're going to leave it up here for a moment for you. Yes. Noting as well that it looks like Councillor Maves left. Okay, thank you. If we can go back to the main motion and the speakers list. Great, thank you. Councillor Augustine, to the main motion.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. I made some points earlier. If we could get the motion as amended, I would like some more information about the high electricity and infrastructure portion that's in one of the clauses here. It doesn't meet the affordability guideline, and we talked about that. I'm pleased that the amendment that we carried here does address it in terms of the 1.5 versus the 2. But no other department, no other area are we saying, well, except for this, except for that. So can we just hear a little bit more? The report is actually light on that element, I found, Mr. Chair. So can we hear a little bit more about the electricity and infrastructure?
Sure. Director Chamberlain.
Through the chair, the council may be familiar with the fact that for the Safe Drinking Water Act, we're required to do a financial sustainability plan for our licensing, and we do that every 5 years. And we're actually in the process right now of creating that financial sustainability plan. And as part of that process, we've flagged electricity and infrastructure as significant challenges to the water wastewater budget, primarily in infrastructure, because you will see if you look at table 2 or the appendix 2 in the budget, we did include about $600,000 of an electricity pressure in the 1.9% increase estimate for water wastewater. However, infrastructure is a 7.7% pressure, I believe is what we've identified, or $7.7 million pressure on the water wastewater budget. So the guidance policy clearly, as I read it out previously, identifies the opportunity for staff to identify where the guidance tied to inflation is unachievable. And what we're trying to do here is provide early signals of what Council will see when they see the financial sustainability review or sustainability plan for water wastewater. We don't want Council to be surprised by what comes back with that. So this was our intention to signal that that is going to be a pressure that may not be or will definitely be a challenge within inflation.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. But what? Okay, so that's 2A. What about 2B? Staff be directed to present a separate report for consideration outlining electricity infrastructure requirements. I mean, it appears, to, Mr. Chair, it appears to be a little bit of the cart before the horse. So we're saying on the one hand, yeah, exclusive electricity infrastructure. Oh, but let's find out how much that is. I'm saying, you know, what I'd recommend is we remove the exclusivity and get the report. And then when council looks at the budget, we can say, okay, in this case, because of these reasons, we need to make an adjustment. And by the same token, Mr. Chair, we know that electricity under the new government is going to go down. So I don't know why we're budgeting more for it. It's going to decrease, or the increase isn't going to be as great, or et cetera, right? So I'd like to make an amendment that we remove the exclusive of electricity infrastructure in 2A, because we're going to get a report on it in 2B. Hope there's a seconder.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that amendment? And then I know Councillor had a question there as well for 2B. Councillor D'Angelo, thank you. We'll have the clerk put that on the screen. In the meantime, Director Chamberlain, there was a question about 2B as well.
Through the chair, that's to be, certainly our intent was to signal the exposure there, which we've done in 2B. So as far as the deletion of the section and paragraph in the parentheses or brackets is fine. 2B, the vision there was as part of the water wastewater or the water sustainability plan, that's the information that would come forward, identifying what the opportunities and mitigation strategies are there. And certainly we flagged last year with the water wastewater budget that many municipalities have come before us have looked at some significant increases in their sustainability plans, and certainly that's what we were intending to flag, and we'll bring forward with that report that's coming back, I believe, in the fall.
Thank you. So that report's going to come forward anyway, I guess, so committee is aware. What is the impact of this particular amendment?
Through the chair, because section or 2B still provides for the fact that we're going to continue to inform of that impact, deleting it from the section in brackets doesn't preclude us from still continuing to bring back separate information on what the challenge is related to electricity and infrastructure.
Okay. So speakers list on the amendment.
Mr. Chair, I would like to go back to the main motion after the amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Easton on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, that was overlap.
Oh,
from
okay.
before. Thank you.
All right, seeing no speakers to this amendment, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Councillor Augustine, you still have the floor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that clarity from staff on that. The uploading, I'm pleased that Councillor Hodgson spoke about it. I think if you do the calculation, and I think you mentioned this, it's $11.42 million over the last term, and as you accumulate it, that works out to 3.6% over the 4 years of this term of council, and we don't have that coming forward. It is something I think that the Association of Municipalities of Ontario have considered and talked about and are anxious about in terms of any new government coming in. We have one with the downloading, and the potential for downloading to municipalities and property taxpayers as a way to balance a budget. So I guess I just wanted to comment on that, and this council may want to dip its oar in the water, follow others, follow AMO, to say, this is a real issue, and we might want to encourage a new government to consider that as it tries to balance and work on its budget. So I wanted to highlight that, but I wanted to thank Councillor Hodgson for raising that as well. The final thing, Mr. Chair, is on the NPCA dividend. So it's not an operation, so I hope this isn't a conflict. I'll call it a dividend.
I am going to step aside.
I'm sorry.
Don't apologize, please. I'll ask Vice Chair Jeffs to take the chair, as I would have a conflict on any NPCA matters as I'm an employee there. Thank you.
It's not really, okay.
Thanks, Councillor Augustine. So if you want to continue on.
Thanks, Madam Chair. It's great to see you back here. Thank you. Just regarding what I call the NPCA dividend, I note it's not here, and yet there's a reduction of the point that I saw. So I'm looking for clarity on that. A reduction of 0.4 million on the operating side, and yet this council made a motion to use those dollars, and I think after in 2019 put them in the taxpayer affordability reserve. So I just want to hear a little bit about the amount that is, should things go favorable with the City of Hamilton and their appeal, and if that's available, for using this as we look at, especially the target for taxes in number 1.
Through the chair, the amount of the reserve payment to the region has not yet been received in 2018. I believe it was, I'm trying to recall the direction of council, was that it be held in reserve until such time as we could utilize it in the 2019 budget. That amount has not yet come to us. It's pending a judicial review. So we haven't incorporated that. However, we have incorporated the baseline budget amount that would no longer be required to go to the reserve because it's not pending the judicial review. So that's the only part that we've included in there, but yes, there is an opportunity for the lump sum payment of the $1.2 million to be to the benefit of the 2019 budget, but because it's pending legal situation, it's not included in here.
Thanks. I thought that might be included as well. So what is the total? I'm sorry, what is the total? It's not, is it 1.2?
Through the chair, I believe it's 1.28 million-ish.
Okay, thank you very much. The final thing, and this is dealing with the presentation, Madam Chair, so I don't know if Councillor Barrett can come back, but I'll keep going. In the presentation, our director stated that 2019 would possibly see a very large increase in assessment growth because of the building, successful building nature in 2017. So, but we're not predicting that, or staff aren't predicting that on the growth side. So can we just hear a little bit more about that and why?
Through the chair, in terms of the preliminary allocation and apportionment that's included in the report, we've more conservatively, originally, prior to the change to 1.5, we used a 2% and a 3.5%. And plus a 1.5% for growth, for a total of 3.5%, because certainly I think it's easier to, once we know that we're actually going to realize that money, to identify where we can target it, rather than target how we're going to spend it and then have to dial it back. So that was the recommendation of staff, to go with a gross 3.5%, which would net down to 2 after 1.5%. So that essentially that 0.4% would be held in abeyance, with an opportunity, as we continue through the process, we would identify what the opportunities are.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just as staff, we're trying to signal to us that there could be some risk on electricity and infrastructure. They're also signaling to us that there could be some benefit on growth and some hope, but they're recommending, in essence, a minimum of 1.5. Is that a good assessment?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Easton. Oh, that's quite all right.
I'm not asking to speak.
So thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. I suspect there will be a recorded vote called, so I'll look to the clerk to open the vote when ready.
The vote is open.
Okay, thank you. That is carried. Leave it up for a moment for Councillor Burrows. There are no consent items for information. Is there any other business? Seeing no other business, the next meeting will be held January 10th, 2019. And at this point, I'd like to thank committee for your hard work this entire term, this being the last budget committee of the term. And on behalf of Councillor Jeffson, I thank you so much for allowing us to be your chair and vice chair. And thank you to staff as well throughout the term. Adjourned. Thank you.